This is Eyewitness News with live breaking news.
Good afternoon, I'm Liz Nagy. We're breaking into streaming coverage right now to bring you breaking news from an Iran protest happening right now in West LA. Air 7 was overhead right when a large crowd got going after someone into a U-Haul. Now, to put some context to this entire situation, there was a planned protest for 2 o'clock this afternoon outside the federal building in Westwood. That protest was called Anti-Iranian Regime Rally. Well, about 3:30 this afternoon, just as Air 7 flew over this protest to kind of get eyes on what was happening, this is what happened. That U-Haul drove through a very large crowd of protesters. It's difficult to tell how many people. We are told by LAPD nobody was injured in this, but you can see this quickly became a very, very tense situation. There was a driver inside that U-Haul. You can see him interacting with protesters who are jabbing flagpoles and all sorts of objects through the window at him. What you cannot see in this video, on the other side of that U-Haul, there are Iranian signs that have some sort of message written on them. Whatever was going on in this crowd, people were unhappy, perhaps also scared, because there was a U-Haul truck driving through this massive crowd of people. As you can imagine, this created quite a scene. We're going to let this video play out for you. This was just about 3 o'clock this afternoon, so a little more than an hour ago. I'm sorry, 3:30. This was just less than an hour ago. And as this video plays out, we've watched it here a few times in the newsroom. You can see the crowd physically pulls that driver out of the U-Haul cab. And as they are doing so, you can see people in the crowd going after him. What you can't tell there, those are LAPD officers that are also involved in pulling the driver out of that truck, trying to take that person into custody. And as police officers are doing that, the crowd is going after that person, trying to physically harm them. It is a very, very tense situation. And what we're going to see here is police ultimately walk this person through that angry crowd of people and take that person into custody. But all the while, people in this protest crowd are going after this person. As we mentioned, this was an anti-Iranian regime rally protest that was planned in Westwood outside the federal building. You can tell this is a very large crowd. Now, this comes on top of protests that have been unfolding all week and getting increasingly tense in Iran and also here in the United States. This started in Iran as sort of an economic protest. When shops started closing, the currency is devolving under the regime. People there in the streets are beginning to revolt. So wait, hold on, I want you to watch this video here. That is police taking the driver of that U-Haul away while protesters continue to chase the person who is in police custody. We do know that no ambulances were called. Police have said nobody was injured. That person is now being walked away, and the driver of that U-Haul is in LAPD custody. We will then find out more information about what exactly happened here, if this was intentional, what the means were behind all of this. But as you can also see to the left, that's Air 7 streaming live right now. That protest has gotten even larger. There are hundreds of people out there in the street in Westwood protesting outside of the federal building.
And Jory Rand here joining you now with this coverage of what has played out in Westwood today, that chaos. And you saw the person, as the person was being taken into custody, other people coming up and hitting that person, striking them with the police right there. This has been a tense situation that has been dating back months, even years or generations from what we have seen.
It's really heated up in just the last week or so. So as we mentioned, starting in Iran and sort of spreading across the country here in the United States and really around the world, we've seen demonstration like this. There is a very large population of Iranian Americans here in Los Angeles, the largest population of Iranian Americans outside of Iran. And we're told by one of our colleagues that that flag that you see right there, that is a flag that stands for all of Iran being represented, but they are asking to be represented not by the Ayatollah, the supreme leader right now, but by a new leader. Apparently there is some disagreement within the population of Iran about exactly who should lead the country. But one thing that these groups can all agree on is that they do not want the current leader, the Ayatollah, to be in control of this country any longer.
It has been a repressive regime for a long time, and it's been a country of two different societies, one that is more Western, more free, and then we have the clerics who rule over with a very stern fist. Reza Pahlavi is the son of the Shah of Iran. The Shah, of course, ousted. If anyone has seen the movie Argo, you get a brief history into what happened there. But of course, that was highlighted by the hostage situation in 1979 and 1980. And he is now the son. Reza Pahlavi is the son of the Shah. That is the figure that a lot of people want to see return to power, open the society back up, which was once a thriving worldwide society.
Okay, so this video that we're showing you here on the right side of the screen, this is the video I was referencing earlier. These are the signs that are on the other side of that U-Haul that drove through the crowd. And you can see one of those signs at the bottom says no mullah. That means no leader. That stands for the Ayatollah who is in control of Iran right now. This is essentially groups calling for regime change, although as you can see, the protesters in that crowd are not happy with what that sign says. They are ripping those signs off the side of the U-Haul, and this is, at least in part, what angered the crowd. And as we were speaking with an Iranian American here just a few minutes ago to kind of get some context to this situation, what we're being told is part of the fuel of all of this is there are several different political beliefs in Iran. There are several different factions. But for the most part, the thing everybody can agree on is that they do not want the Ayatollah in charge of Iran anymore. So that you can see that sign says, do not repeat 1953. A lot of different flags out there. This is a crowd that really got going because the U-Haul drove through that crowd and also because of the messages written on the side of that truck.
Right. The Shah was more connected to the United States. It was more a Western society. And within Iran during that time, there was the more religious movement that basically took over the country, a student-led movement, but then the clerics took over as well, became more repressed, more isolated, and as you see, they have connected with some other bad actors throughout the world, teaming up with Russia and China. South Korea, there are ties there as well, and problems all throughout the Middle East. Iran kind of leading some of the problems that Israel has dealt with and other democracies in the Middle East. Proxy wars, Lebanon, Iran-fueled violence against some of the democracies of the Middle East. And so here you have violence breaking out once again. Two factions. There you go. On the right, you can see that poster right there. That is Reza Pahlavi. That is the figure that a lot of people want to see take over Iran, the son of the former leader of Iran, the Shah. And again, I remember covering a story maybe around summer of last year in this exact spot. Right at the corner of the federal building there, a crowd gathered pushing for Reza Pahlavi to take over Iran. And he has lived in outside of Iran. He has been ousted from that country, trying to return and clearly gaining power. And it was at his direction this week, he told people in Iran to protest, to see if they can finally make a change here. And we did see hundreds of thousands, if not millions, take to the streets of Iran. And that is when you saw the crackdown of the leadership of that country, shutting off power, shutting off the internet, no access to the outside world. And it is now extended here to the United States.
This is unrest here in the United States that is emblematic of what is happening in Iran. And again, this started as an economical protest. The currency in the country is crumbling. Shops started closing because it is simply not sustainable. People cannot afford the cost of living. They blame the regime for that. As Iranian Americans, many of them are very, very closely connected to the country. Many people have family there. So this is unrest that is spilling out into the streets of Southern California in solidarity with the people of Iran who are dealing with this in very real time. This was a protest that started as an economical one and quickly turned political, as you can see with the signs of Reza Pahlavi, the Shah, the son of the Shah, in Iran. Now, there are many factions. There's no united front on exactly what people want to see happen. But people are upset with the economic situation, and they blame the politics of that country, and this is what we are seeing as a result of that. The good news here in Southern California with this protest happening right now is, despite the fact that there was a U-Haul truck that drove through a crowd of what looked to be hundreds of people, somehow no one was injured. The crowd very upset with the driver as they physically yanked him out of the cab of that truck and tried to beat him with flagpoles and things that they had in their hand as part of the protest signs. And he appeared to be uninjured as he was taken away by LAPD. And somehow in all of this, there were not even any ambulances called. So that is a good sign here. But it does appear, as though, as we're watching this from Air 7, now the crowd appears to be dissipating a little bit. Things seem to be calming down. But for a few minutes initially after this situation happened, it appeared as though the crowd was very, very revved up, and they were very concentrated in that one section of street right outside of the federal building.
You mentioned the lack of injuries. The LA Fire Department just putting something out. 2 patients were evaluated on scene. Both declined treatment. LAFD firefighter paramedics are currently responding to reports of a 3rd person in the general area. Resources are delayed making patient contact due to the size of the crowd. And so a lot of people on hand here, but I mean, how many stories have we covered where we've talked about a vehicle into a crowd like this, and we're talking about deaths and dozens of injuries? Here we have two people who were evaluated and both declined transport to the hospital.
And it just so happened that Air 7 was over that scene just moments after that U-Haul drove through the crowd. So that video that we were showing is what happened in real time as Air 7 arrived on the scene. The video that you're looking at right here live on the left side of your screen is video live of what is happening in Westwood right now. On the right is what happened about 3:30 this afternoon, just outside of the Federal Building in Westwood, as a U-Haul, that U-Haul right there, drove through the crowd of people and stopped. It's unclear if that person stopped because that was the ending of where they were trying to go, or if they were physically stopped by that crowd. But you can see it got very tense. This was less than an hour ago, or just about an hour ago right now.
And those officers in that video on the right, people poking flagpoles, jumping up to punch the driver in the face, with officers right there mostly helpless at this point. They eventually take that driver into custody, but you're also dealing with a massive crowd, so they can't exactly start arresting people as they come up to assault the driver, justified or not. You are not allowed to do that. Police normally would take people into custody, including the driver, but they just weren't able to do that due to the size and the anger of the crowd in that moment. And so they're just basically trying to cordon off that truck, be able to take the driver into custody. It was a very tense situation with not a lot of room to work and a very, very angry crowd.
And all of this comes at a time that feels very politically fraught in this country. Yesterday, we were watching scenes much less violent than this, but somewhat similar to this, with a tense protest. Oh, you can see this person jumping on the hood of the U-Haul, trying to kick in the windshield. So this is an example of just how heated that crowd got as the U-Haul drove into the crowd. But again, we were saying this was happening at a politically fraught time in our country. Yesterday, we were watching a protest like this against Immigration and Customs Enforcement in downtown LA, where people stopped at the Federal Building there. We saw situations like this play out over the summer. There have been widespread protests across the country this week over the U.S. actions in Venezuela and against Immigration and Customs Enforcement here in this country. So we are sort of experiencing a very fraught time.
Indeed, on so many different fronts. Just to give you an idea of how protests go in Iran under the current regime there, 2 weeks of protest have been happening. More than 115 people are dead. More than 2,600 have been detained by the Iranian authorities. The Attorney General of Iran is warning protesters they will be treated as enemies of God, a capital charge. That is the death penalty for protesting against the government of Iran. President Trump has been looking at military options for what he is going to do against Iran. We are still awaiting a decision from the president. He has struck at Iran's nuclear facilities last year in a major aerial strike in which he hit a mountain complex that housed some nuclear facilities. It appears that Iran knew about the attack beforehand and was able to get the bulk of their program out of that facility, but the facility itself sounds like it was destroyed, or at least heavily damaged, that it can't be used for several years. But Iran has been a focus of this Trump administration, and really, I'd say every president since the Carter administration, if not prior to that as well. It's been a problem for a long time, and a lot of people have been killed there. They are very open to capital charges and openly hanging people for offenses that we would consider minor or not offense at all in Western society. And so it is fraught. It is a different society. And here you have people driving through with the Iranian flag in a convertible SUV, and
this is happening after
the movement continues here on the ground.
Right. This is happening after a planned protest that was scheduled to start at 2 o'clock this afternoon in Westwood, outside of the Federal Building. The name of that protest, Anti-Iranian Regime Rally. Part of the reason this is happening in Westwood is that is an area of Los Angeles that has the largest concentration of Iranian American population. The largest concentration of Iranian Americans is on the west side of Los Angeles. Yeah. There are several 100,000 Iranian Americans here in the area. So they chose to protest outside the Federal Building, as they have during situations like this before. This is what the crowd looks like now. It appears to have dissipated a good amount over the last half hour or so. But even before that U-Haul drove into the crowd just about an hour or so ago, there were several hundred people, passionate people, standing outside the federal building, having their voices be heard. Part of the reason it's happening at the federal building is there's controversy about how the U.S. involvement in Iran, how much the U.S. should get involved in this situation, follows weeks of protests in Iran that started as an economic protest because the currency and the economy is devolving there. And this has quickly turned political, as these things often tend to do. Here in the United States, you can tell that is also the case. There are several hundred protesters who have that large, oversized, outstretched Iranian flag sort of as a unified front against the regime in Iran.
I'm actually just going over some of my notes from when I covered this story back in June of last year at this very spot. Some of these quotes from the people we talked to who were taking part, I'm sure we're hearing echoes of that today. This is one from Hamed from Orange County who told me the majority of Iranians, they don't want the Islamic Republic, period. What we need is the willingness of an Iranian nation to be combined with international support. And he says that doesn't mean military support at all, but the type of support that will be able to overthrow this regime. So just support from around the world. We have another one from Golnar, who is an Iranian American, who was in the Air Force, a general, a Top Gun pilot who was killed, executed by the Iranian regime. He was 19 years old. He says, ever since then, I've been fighting for our people and praying that Iran will be free from the tyranny of these people. Now is a time for our armed forces in Iran to do the rest of the job and actually make this happen and save our people. Those are the kind of words that can get you literally killed in Iran. But this has been a long time coming. And when a despot, when a dictator, when authoritarian rule feels they are threatened, as the Ayatollah and his regime is feeling right now, they clamp down, they tighten up, and they start killing people. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. And a lot of people in America have ties to Iran, on the West Side specifically, particularly, and they're not okay with it. And once again, coming out to show that. And
I think people here in the United States at least feel the freedom to come out and speak safely, to voice those concerns that they cannot freely do in Iran. They're much more safe to do so. Although, as you can see, with a U-Haul driving through a crowd, that is not without consequences here. We're told by somebody that we spoke with that's read some of the signs on the side of the U-Haul truck that is also an anti-regime, some of the signs were anti-regime messages, but perhaps a different faction of anti-regime than some of the people in the protest. That's perhaps why they are ripping those signs off the side of the U-Haul after this truck drove through a crowd of people just about an hour ago in Westwood.
Per LAPD, it sounds like they are talking about dispersing this crowd, putting an order out, telling them to demonstrators to leave the area. We do see from Air 7 that it has broken up a little bit. People are starting to leave the area, but right now it looks like they are blocking the intersection. Is that right on the corner of Wilshire? No, this seems like maybe a different corner just down the road. Yeah, but we see people walking down the road. Still a large crowd gathered here at Wilshire and the federal complex there on the corner. This spot, of course, we have seen many times in the last 12 months. This is where U.S. Marines were stationed when President Trump sent them to Los Angeles. We saw National Guard members, so we saw protests here for that. We saw protests here after the strike on Iran against the regime in Iran, and here we are again in 2026, once again demonstrating against the Ayatollah and his regime in Iran, and a very dangerous moment. If you are just joining our stream, one of the main reasons why we are on right now is because just a short time ago, a U-Haul truck drove into a large crowd that had gathered here outside the federal building. There is that U-Haul. It came to a stop, and the crowd went wild trying to get that driver out, throwing flagpoles, throwing punches. The LAPD officers doing their best to try and keep people away from the driver before taking him into custody, who continued to be under assault by the crowd that themselves were, it looks like, apparently attacked by this driver.
Right, and you can see in just a moment as this video plays out, somebody climbs up onto the hood of that U-Haul, kicks in the windshield as the crowd and LAPD officers physically pull that driver out of the cab, someone jabbing their flagpoles through the door and the window, trying to physically harm the person driving that U-Haul. On the other side of that truck are messages against the regime in Iran, but perhaps messages from a different faction than this group that was out there protesting. This is a protest. So you can see the U-Haul right there in live time driving through a crowd of hundreds of people who were out in Westwood peacefully protesting against the regime in Iran when that truck just straight drove through hundreds of people.
Yeah, you try and come up with possibilities for exactly what happened. Is it someone who was part of the crowd who just didn't know how to drive properly? That angered them. They're obviously connected to this movement because you can see the signage. So it's not just a stray U-Haul driver that made their way through here accidentally. Whether they are with the crowd or completely against the crowd or with part of the crowd or wanted to hurt the crowd or just, this was an accident, we do not know. But the crowd took it as an attack. They're ripping down signs off the side of the U-Haul, attacking the driver that drove through that crowd. The police were able to pull the driver out and take him into custody, but even as he was walked away by police, people continued to come up and attack him, hit him with flagpoles and objects, trying to throw punches while in police custody. The police didn't look like were doing anything to those who were pulling off those attacks. But we'll see if they're taking a look with other officers, if they're going to keep this video, maybe go back and address it at a later time.
When it's interesting, based on what we saw yesterday, excuse me, with a protest outside the federal building in downtown Los Angeles, there was a notable absence of law enforcement. They were sort of sitting back and allowing protesters to peacefully march through the street. So given what we are seeing in this video, you have to imagine there was a similar posturing from law enforcement today. This was a planned protest outside of a federal building for 2 o'clock in the middle of the afternoon on a Sunday. And it appears as though the situation changed very quickly, as it often does in protests, where there is a very tense and amplified mood amongst people. LAPD officers likely had to scramble into the crowd and sort of separate the truck and the crowd of people. But they were quickly, LAPD officers in that video seemed to be quickly overwhelmed by the size and ferocity of the crowd. Yeah,
you saw on the side of that U-Haul, it says no repeat of 1953. That was basically the U.S. and British-backed coup to overthrow the government of Iran. Of course, it was taken back a generation later in 1979, something that Americans know all too well when those hostages were taken in 1979, freed on January 20th, 1980, just hours or minutes after President Reagan was sworn into office. The Iranian regime did not like President Carter and specifically wanted to free the hostages out of his regime to give credit to Ronald Reagan and not to Jimmy Carter.
That sign says no prince, no Ayatollah, and it's difficult to tell what it says at the bottom of that because protesters are physically ripping it off the side of the truck, so they clearly do not agree with that message and are also enraged by the fact that the driver just drove a truck through people who were out there demonstrating. Many of the Iranian Americans here in the Los Angeles area ended up here after the 1979 Iranian Revolution.
Right.
So they have very close ties to this entire situation.
And it hasn't gotten any easier to live in Iran. People have been streaming from that country for generations, searching for freedom, but there are also people who continue to live there and are happy with the regime. They do have supporters. The clerics in Iran, the Revolutionary Guard, are a very intense and a scary entity to deal with. Not afraid to publicly execute for minor offenses.
You can see the windows of that U-Haul right there, even on the passenger side, smashed in, the rearview window being smashed there by people in the crowd.
Is the driver still in the vehicle at this point that this video is taken?
Doesn't
I mean, someone's talking. I don't know if they're talking through the cab or whether they're still trying to pull the driver out at this point.
But you can just see in the video how amped up people are. It's difficult.
Look, the driver is still in. This is before police. Yeah, so this is prior to police showing up. And
this video taken by one of our photographers who was in the middle of this situation, clearly getting a very clear vantage point of all of this.
Right. Again, we see the reaction. We do not know the motivation.
Right.
Because there are, to untrained eyes, like admittedly mine, I do not know which side this person is on based on the messaging, because it says no Ayatollah, no Shah, right? So we don't know who they want to be leading Iran or their connection to the people gathered there, whether this was an accident and people were upset, or whether this was an actual attack, an intentional assault with a vehicle on a crowd.
And you can see the live images from Air 7 right now on your screens. There is virtually not much left to this crowd now. LAPD issued that dispersal order within the last 20 minutes or so. Several hundred people sort of dissipated after all this. About the planned protest started about 2 o'clock this afternoon outside the federal building in Westwood. And it had been going for about an hour and a half when a U-Haul vehicle just drove through a crowd of hundreds of people.
Okay. It's down to about 100 people, it looks like, at this point, where it was several hundred. And so this crowd is breaking up. You do see, I'm trying to see lined up against that fence whether those are officers. No, that might just be people who are relaxing there against the fence, walking onto the grounds. That is leading up to the federal complex here in Westwood, right at the corner of Wilshire. And here are the LAPD officers kind of, again, hanging back. This is something we saw yesterday with some demonstrations against ICE and federal authorities. A noted lack of police presence, law enforcement presence yesterday. And so they are just kind of letting those peaceful demonstrators make their way out on their own. It doesn't seem like they're moving in. We don't see anyone with riot gear kind of pushing this crowd, urging them to move. And so, again, what we believe had been an entirely peaceful demonstration rocked when that U-Haul van made its way through the crowd and into the crowd, angering a lot of people. We are waiting word from police on the motivations, whether this was an accident or whether this was intentional. But the people who were on the ground there, the demonstrators, certainly took this personally and acted as if this was a deliberate attack.
And the driver has now been taken into custody and is seemingly being questioned by police officers. Just about 15 minutes ago, LAPD issued that dispersal order. So just in the last 15 minutes, hundreds of people have sort of heeded those calls to leave and have left the situation outside of the federal building. That's just a small remaining faction of the group that was out there about an hour ago. But that united Iranian flag remains there, stretched along the sidewalk.
Yeah, we're looking at some of the notes on this organization that put this together. This was scheduled to run from 2 to 4 p.m. today at that federal building complex at Wilshire. They did expect hundreds of people, and in basically the flyer for this, it's a photo of Reza Pahlavi. He is the son of the former Shah of Iran. Stand in solidarity with the people of Iran for regime change was the title of this movement. They want new leadership in Iran. They want to do away with the repressive Ayatollah and his regime. It has been a hard life for 3 generations now, 50 years almost 50 years in Iran since the government was overthrown. The U.S.-backed government was overthrown by the Ayatollah and a student-led movement. And it is not an easy place to exist if you don't walk the line completely from what the government says you need to do.
And while much of this started as an economical situation, it quickly turned political. Many of the protests are demanding a less religious Iran, less strict religious Iran, and a more secular Iran.
Right. And again, this is surprising to a lot of people, but there is a largely secular portion of Iran, largely in Tehran and the major cities, that looks like it could be here in Los Angeles. It looks like it could be on the west side. It is a very open society. Women have rights. There is a lot of leisure and arts that are present. It is not what people have the idea of Iran, but that's not the entirety of Iran. And at times we can see them crack down, and it is it's as we said earlier, it is 2 different societies living in the same country under one leadership, fighting 2 very different eras in this country's history. One, a more Western, U.S.-backed society, very open, more secular, and then you have the clerics who have taken over the government and led by the Ayatollah, several Ayatollahs before him, who are very repressive. It is not a good place to live if you are a woman. If you are gay, it could be a death sentence. Openly gay or caught in open society, and any kind of freedoms that we enjoy here in our country, it is a much different story there in large parts of this country. But again, there is a lot of freedom, surprisingly, in portions, in pockets of Iran that a lot of people don't know about.
And many of the people here in the Los Angeles area, Iranian Americans, have ended up in the area as a result of the 1979 Iranian Revolution. People are out here protesting in solidarity with the people in Iran who may not have the same freedom to do so. But in this situation this afternoon, things were fine for an hour and a half and then very quickly got out of control when a U-Haul drove through the crowd. It's still not clear if the person driving that U-Haul was in disagreement with the crowd, but it appears that there was some sort of intent to it, as though there were signs on the side of the U-Haul. But we will have to wait to hear from police about what exactly happened here. Regardless, the crowd was very unhappy with this situation.
Wild video. This could have ended badly in a couple different ways. The U-Haul could have done a lot more destruction and damage to people as it drove into that crowd. Luckily, it looks like no one was injured. 2 people were evaluated on scene by the LA Fire Department, declined transport to the hospital, and they seemed to be okay. There was word of a 3rd person who might be injured. The LAFD said they were having trouble locating them if there was a 3rd because of the size of the crowd. It doesn't sound like that person was seriously injured, if they were at all. This driver also could have faced serious injury if the police hadn't moved in and stopped the rabid crowd from pulling him from the truck.
Well, and as we're watching this video, again, we've seen it several times now if you've been with us here for the last half hour or so, that driver appears to be engaging with the crowd, yelling back at them as they're jabbing flagpoles through the window. It appears that driver is throwing some sort of, something back at them and clearly appears to be engaging, at least verbally, with people in the crowd before the crowd and police officers physically pull him out of the cab of the truck.
Here's where officers take him out. It looks like he was more than willing to come out of that truck. At this point, needed protection from the crowd. And that's when the person jumps up on the hood and starts stomping in the windshield. And as you see, people continue to attack this guy as police are taking him into custody, and that would continue. I don't know how much tape we have here to roll, but we do have video of that driver being let off on foot in handcuffs with a police custody, and people continue to come up and assault him.
Well, and the crowd is so furious here. It appears as though police officers are even having difficulty getting that person, the driver, through the crowd. People are just continuing to throw punches at the head of the driver. The person that's right up against the cab right now, that is the driver of that U-Haul. And police are attempting to lead through a very angry crowd and take away in custody. This plays out for at least another minute or so as they sort of force that person through the crowd with people throwing punches the entire way. Yeah,
there's no other egress from this location than through the crowd, and there's not a whole lot that the police can do. And there's another shot to the back of the head, and this will continue here. In a moment, we're going to see someone walk up with a pole, if it's a flag pole or some other kind of pole, and take a really good shot at the back of this driver's head. I think it's coming up right about here. You see that person approach, and there he goes. You see that pole in his hand, and a 2-handed whack overhand. It doesn't look like he really connected with his head. It was more the shoulder or the arm of the officer who was leading him away, but that could have done some damage.
Right, to the officer or to the driver of that U-Haul. But the person being led away in handcuffs right now was the person who was pulled from the cab of that U-Haul truck that drove through a crowd of protesters outside of the federal building in Westwood. You can see people from the crowd continue to chase this person and police officers down the street as he is led away in police custody. I also think it's interesting, granted we are only seeing one very small angle of all of this, but it appears that police are so concentrated on taking that driver into custody that the police were not taking anyone else into custody in that crowd.
Right. Well, that might also be they don't have the numbers to start arresting protesters, because if you start taking demonstrators into custody, that's going to anger the demonstrators even more, who feel like they were the target of this attack. And I don't know if that was a resource thing or just trying to get this guy out of here and calm the situation down. But you're right. They did nothing to take anyone into custody or other than flank that area to stop people from attacking the driver.
Oh, and there's the U-Haul. This is a live image coming in from Air 7 right now. There's the U-Haul that drove into the crowd of people. That's the U-Haul that was at the center of that crowd, the video you were watching just a moment ago. And now that we can see it by itself, it gives you an idea of how many hundreds of people were surrounding that U-Haul in that moment.
Right. Now cordoned off by yellow police tape. We have paramedics and police and fire right here who are treating any potential victims. It does not appear as if there were any to be taken to the hospital. The 2 that were evaluated declined transport to the hospital, which, that raises some more questions for me about, was this an intentional attack? Because if you have a U-Haul of this size and you want to inflict damage on a crowd, it's not very hard to do so, and that really didn't happen here.
We have a reporter and a photojournalist on the ground. They're trying to speak with people in the crowd, get some information from police about what exactly happened here. We're going to prepare to regroup and join you at the top of the hour on ABC 7 for our 5 o'clock newscast. But as we leave you, we just want to let you know what exactly was going on here. These are live images coming in from Westwood, where a very large crowd of anti-regime protesters for Iran were protesting outside the federal building. U-Haul drove through that crowd of people just about 3:30 this afternoon.
We'll continue to follow the situation and join you in just about 5 minutes live on ABC 7. We'll see you then.
This is Eyewitness News with live breaking news.
Breaking now as we come on for Eyewitness News at 5. Chaos erupting after a car drove through the middle of a large protest against Iran in Westwood. Good evening, I'm Liz Nagy.
And I'm Jory Rand. Moments later, Air 7 caught the tense moments as protesters tried to physically rip the driver from the cab of the truck, throwing punches, objects, and jabbing flagpoles through the window. LAPD officers then detained the driver, walking him away with the driver still under attack from the angry crowd.
Here's a live picture of the scene right now from Air 7 as the LAPD works to try and maintain calm in that area after issuing a dispersal order just about 30 minutes ago.
That U-Haul truck there now cordoned off by police tape. Eyewitness News reporter Tim Pulliam is live at the scene in Westwood with more on what played out today. Tim, what can you tell us?
Liz, Jory, this demonstration became quickly chaotic when that driver of this U-Haul right over here began moving toward the crowd. You can see that it is right here at the corner. All that shattered glass from the windshield, debris, and glass on the ground. This is a crime scene surrounded by crime tape and police. And we have video of that moment of this U-Haul moving toward the crowd. Air 7 showing you this U-Haul surrounded by a crowd beating the truck. This happened on Veteran Avenue near the federal building on Wilshire. That's not too far from where this anti-Iran government demonstration was taking place this afternoon. At one point, the crowd manages to get the driver out of the vehicle, and eventually LAPD gets involved. Now, we spoke with an eyewitness moments ago. Take a listen to what they saw and heard.
This guy from the last traffic light, he came inside people and he started running through the people. And many of us, we ran behind him trying to capture him. Finally, long way from back there to here, we stopped the U-Haul truck and the people pulled him down and started beating him up. And this is a clear example of what we're facing. The people of Iran are facing this kind of terrorism, and they're doing it all over the world. And this is a clear example.
Now, you're taking a live look at what is left of this demonstration. That is the intersection of Wilshire and Veteran Avenue, and police here were dispersing the crowd, moving them back toward that intersection. And from my vantage point, it looks like the crowd has dwindled. But this afternoon, it was hundreds of people here for this anti-Iran government demonstration. Now you can see a line of LAPD officers just making sure that no one comes through this yellow line. But it is a massive crime scene here, and we still don't know the circumstances that led up to this driver of this U-Haul coming here to move toward the crowd. But as you can see, the damage, the investigation continues. I'm Tim Pulliam. Back to you.
Yeah, still waiting to hear if this was intentional or accidental. Tim, thank you very much. Now, we've also seen a lot of demonstrations this weekend against ICE. Federal authorities, a demand for accountability.